By the mid-1960s, Chevrolet was in the middle of an identity crisis. On one hand, it was building family sedans, pickup trucks, and Corvairs to keep the accountants happy. On the other, it was dabbling in racing technology that would make Ferrari engineers spill their espressos in shock. The problem was that Chevrolet wasn't actually supposed to be doing any of this. The 1957 Automobile Manufacturers Association ban on factory racing meant that Detroit carmakers were officially hands-off when it came to motorsport, which of course meant they carried on, just quietly, in the shadows, behind test facilities and under the watchful eyes of lawyers who could deny everything if someone got caught. The GS2 and its refined sibling, the GS-IIB, were perfect examples of this double life. Publicly, they were engineering research vehicles, but privately, they were Corvette badged science projects designed to test mid-engine layouts, exotic lightweight construction, and a transmission so unusual it confused everyone who drove it. They were not racing cars, at least not officially. They were not production prototypes either. They were experiments, rolling laboratories in fiberglass and aluminium. And if some of the technology happened to migrate down the road to Jim Hall's Chaparral team in Texas, well, that was just research collaboration. So the first GS2 emerged in late 1963, designed by Chevrolet Engineers Center. By this point, Zora Arkus Dantov had already been pushing Corvette racing efforts under the radar with the GS1 cars. Those 5 lightweight monsters had terrified Shelby's Cobras before GM shut down the project. But inside Chevrolet's engineering department, Vice President Frank Winchell wasn't about to stop experimenting. He wanted to explore what came after the front-engine Corvette, and he wanted something that could take on European mid-engine racers at their own game. What emerged was a curious machine. The GS2's chassis was made from spot-welded sheet metal. The body, designed by Larry Shinoda, was an ultra-thin fiberglass shell that looked futuristic but was barely strong enough to keep the car together. Underneath sat an experimental, all-aluminium 327 cubic inch small block V8, coupled not to a conventional manual gearbox but to an in-house automatic transaxle with a single speed. Yes, this thing had just one gear. This gearbox was the brainchild of GM engineer Jerry Merlick. It used a torque converter to vary power delivery, which meant the car didn't need multiple gears. On paper it sounded absurd, but in practice it worked shockingly well. The torque-rich V8 delivered huge surges of power, and the torque converter soaked up the brutality, letting the car put down the power to the rear wheels without the usual drama. Even so, the steel monocoque GS2 was only tested briefly in Michigan before being shipped to Jim Hall's Chaparral cars in Midland, Texas. Hall was already working on a radical mid-engine sports car, and Chevrolet saw him as the perfect independent partner to carry out testing they couldn't officially do themselves. After 2 months, the steel GS2 was destroyed. It had done its job. But the data it produced led to something far more sophisticated, the GS-IIB. Now the GS-IIB was the Corvette project at full tilt. Instead of steel, its chassis was constructed from 0.32-inch aluminium sheet, riveted and bonded together into a proper monocoque. This made it incredibly light, just 1,450 pounds weight. To put that into perspective, that's lighter than a Lotus Elise. Yet, the GS2 had a thunderous V8 with more than 400 horsepower stuffed into it. The power-to-weight ratio was less sports car and more guided missile. Then the bodywork was modified to accept wider tires, addressing one of the GS2's biggest weaknesses. Those narrow tires simply couldn't handle the torque. With more rubber on the ground, the GS-IIB suddenly had grip to match its horsepower. Its layout bore a striking resemblance to the Chaparral 2, and that wasn't a coincidence. The cross-pollination between Chevrolet engineering and Chaparral was constant, with both parties benefiting. Testing moved on once again to Midland, Texas, where Jim Hall himself carried out much of the high-speed driving. And Hall wasn't just a racing driver, he was an engineer who could translate on-track behavior into actionable design changes. His nickname for the G2B was the Eyeball Jiggler, a reference to the car's extreme chassis stiffness. Most drivers didn't really trust something so light, assuming it would fold itself in half at full speed. But it didn't. In fact, the GS-IIB's rigidity made it brutally effective, if somewhat punishing to drive. Performance figures from the period were jaw-dropping. At GM's proving grounds, engineer Jim Musser coaxed the GS-IIB to nearly 198 miles per hour. This in 1964, with tyres that looked like they come off a farm truck and aerodynamics about as sophisticated as a garden shed, was insane. But that speed was possible because the car weighed almost nothing. The aluminium chassis wasn't just light, it was revelatory, and it directly influenced Chaparral's own aluminium tubs, which showed up in the 2C and beyond. Now, if the lightweight monocoque was impressive, the real innovation lay in the transmission. That single-speed automatic wasn't a gimmick, it was a racing weapon. Using a torque converter, it delivered constant, seamless thrust without the interruptions of gear changes. Drivers simply mashed the throttle and let physics do the rest. In a world where Ferrari and Ford were still wrangling with heavy, fragile manual gearboxes, Chevrolet was experimenting with something closer to a modern CVT in principle, but tough enough to handle racing loads. Chaparral adopted this gearbox technology directly, with 1 and 2 speed versions appearing in their race cars. The results were spectacular. Chaparral won 16 major American road races in 1965, using transmissions derived from the GS2 development. From something born out of a Corvette badge test mule, that is a staggering legacy. Now, as you might think, the GS2 and the GS-IIB were never meant for production. They were too experimental, too fragile, and too politically sensitive for Chevrolet to put its name on openly. Yet their influence spread far beyond their short lifespans. Chaparral's cars of the mid-1960s, especially the 2C, bore an uncanny resemblance to the GS-IIB. The automatic transmission, aluminium monocoque, and suspension layouts, pioneered by the Corvette prototypes, became race-winning weapons once translated into Chaparral's racing program. But to end this video off, the GS2 and GS-IIB were cars built in defiance of official rules, which makes them very Corvette indeed. They weren't racing cars, but they raced. They weren't production cars, but they set the template for production ideas. And they weren't really Corvettes at all, but slapping that name on a project made it easier to sneak it past corporate bureaucracy. But yeah, at the end of this video, please let me know what you guys think of this car and its story, and if you guys enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now if you guys did like this video, you must probably enjoy most of my other stuff, so just go through my channel, see if there's something else I like, I'll check you guys in the next one. Cheers, eh?